Over the next 10 days, I'm doing a simple one tip a day video. Check back tomorrow for another. You know that thing on Reddit where you see someone's broken print or pile of spaghetti and you jokingly ask, STL? Can we all stop doing that now? It's not funny. It's just mean. It's poor etiquette and it's tiresome. You should be asking for the 3MF. Obviously. So that aside, allow me to introduce 3MF files. There's been some rumblings lately as to why you should use them, so what are they? Now, I spend a lot of time wading through G-code, and if you watch my vids, then you'll know that I constantly tell you that they are human readable and we can learn stuff from them. STL files, though, they are not. At least, when I open one up in a text editor, it looks like this. Now, on initial glance, if you open up a 3MF file in a text editor, you will get the same thing. But they hide a secret. It's not that secret, it's actually documented, but if you haven't used 3MF, or if you have but you've never looked up how they work, then prepare to have your mind blown. Simply rename the file to a zip, and oh look, it's just a zip file. Is 3MF format a lie? Not really. Inside the zip file you'll find various folders, but the primary one is the 3D folder, which contains a 3D model.model file. This is very inventive file naming, I must say. Microsoft are involved, need I say more. I'll get onto the others in a moment. This 3D model file is human readable. In fact, it's in XML. If you're a programmer like me, or maybe a programmer who can actually program unlike me, don't ask, then you will be aware of XML, but let me run anyone else through it. It's essentially a markup language, not a true programming language. That is to say you have no loops or tests, it's not Turing complete, it's just arranged data between tags like so. The X in XML means extensible, which bugs me because it starts with an E. In XML, though, you can make up the tags as you go along. The point is, I think there's actually a lot of focus in the design of 3MF to really leverage the extensibility of XML. That is to say, they've thought about future-proofing the 3MF file format, which obviously STL is not future-proofed. It's a surprise we're still using it. It's very old. So, if we look at the file anyway, we can see that it has vertices and triangles within a mesh tag. And really, this isn't a lot different to STL, which may be disappointing to some because you're still somewhat constrained to basically triangles rather than mathematical shapes like NURBS, which I'm not going to get into because I have very little understanding myself, but it is a thing that I believe Fusion 360, for example, works in, and probably Blender as well, apparently. Of course, you can improve the resolution of your printed object by increasing the density of the mesh, which just means more triangles, which is why we don't have issues in the real world when 3D printing with STLs. I'm sure you've noticed at least some STLs that are notably more polygonal? Yeah, they have more obvious faces than others. This is probably just down to the resolution of the triangles, in fact it definitely is. And the same will apply to 3MF files, it's not kind of magic here, but do remember that 3MF files are zip archives, so a higher mesh will take up less space. Although honestly, I think that's probably the weakest reason to use them, since even an insanely detailed STL is nothing in this day and age where me speaking this single sentence will take up magnitudes more bandwidth than the file size of a bench sheet in an STL. The fact that it's zipped though does allow multiple files in the archive, which definitely is something I can get behind. Now, I've been using 3MF files for the whole of this 10-day series because I knew I would end on this episode and I would need to have something to say about how well they work. Good planning for a change. I have to say that overall, I noticed almost no difference from STL. Almost, I'll get to that part in a second, but in terms of using 3MF, it's not much of an adaptation to make. Cura and Prusa Slicer both happily import 3MF files. In fact, Prusa Slicer actually wants you to use them as per the vid I will link below. But yes, they are already implemented and work fine. Fusion 360 can export them, and the sharp-eyed among you will have noticed the recent change in Fusion 360 that allows you to save as mesh rather than the old save as STL. OpenSCAD also supports it out of the box. Blender, I think you can, but I did demonstrate my lack of ability on Blender, so I'm not going to try and back that assertion up. The point I'm making here is that this file format is already well established and ready for you to use. Now about the almost. Look at the file structure again. Notice this object tag here. I nearly didn't notice this when I was preparing a multi-part STL to print from Cura, which I'd made in Fusion. this one on screen. I'm used to multi-part STLs being awkward, but I found that I could edit the pieces separately, and I was confused by this because I'd forgotten that I was using 3MF files. This is the biggest benefit, actually the only one I spotted while working with 3MFs during the 15 or so days. Now, moving on, you can include things like part colour, but firstly, nearly nobody has printers capable of doing anything with that. Secondly, I found that, for example, Paint.net here, yeah, I know, me neither, but since Microsoft were involved in creating this spec, I thought I'd have a look at it, and when you set a colour, it does export it into the file, but it exports it as a texture. So that's pretty useless from a current technology standpoint. Even if the slicer supported colour, and even if your printer was an RGB printer and you're Mr. Moneybags, but I think you get the point. 3MF has a lot of potential upsides, but most of them are admittedly not being consistently applied yet, or aren't entirely useful yet, especially between softwares, even though there's literally a spec for this, but whatever. Most of them are of limited use right now because we just don't have the right hardware, or I guess the right mindset in the slicers, because the slicers were almost certainly designed with STL format in mind. So it does beg the question really, why should you be using 3MF format now in 2021? Firstly and foremostly, I think it comes down to adoption. If nobody uses this file format, then it will never be catered for, and its features will never be a priority for software to include this sort of thing. Secondly, well, I've already mentioned the smaller file sizes. Thirdly, I haven't mentioned the better geometry that these files can support because I don't really understand it, but apparently that's also a thing. And finally, the human readability and multiple file and object capabilities shouldn't be underestimated. However, do you know what's coming? That's right, a but. But I have some concerns. Firstly, it comes down to, I suppose, association of presets. One of the things I didn't mention yet that's often used as a selling point for 3MF is the ability to store slicer settings, supports, etc. Now, if you think about how we work, the slicer does a lot of this when it generates the G-code, and it's done from presets that are based on your printer. Now, I know a lot of that is cross-compatible. Indeed, I've printed G-code from one printer on another, and it's often fine, but I'm pretty sure that if you give it more than a moment's thought, you start to cringe at the idea of some presets that could end up or currently end up in a 3MF file that are specific to someone's printer in their bedroom, but they share that to you, and it's absolutely not suitable for your printer. How do you store such information in a file and get around this? Well, I don't know. I've got no idea. I did have a brief look at how Cura deals with it, and I must say I don't like it at all. But let me be clear, this isn't an issue with taking a file from a CAD because it doesn't store this information by default, not currently anyway. Secondly though, and slightly more worryingly, watch this. If you imported this file and sliced it and printed it, you would be in trouble. Cura gave me no warnings or prompts to tell me that the file contains temperature information way outside of safe operation, and the import option was confusing enough and quite limiting too. I had just two options to overwrite who knows what, or to strip most of the benefits of 3MF out and import just the mesh by the looks of it. I'll be honest, I think that needs addressing. If you share a 3MF file on Thingiverse, which is something you can currently do, you could include settings that might damage a printer. Now that's not cool. Worth noting while I'm talking about this is that you could do the same in G-code, and you can share that on Thingiverse as well, so that's definitely something you should never use from untrustworthy sources too. Never use someone else's G-code, especially if you don't know who they are, because you would get even less visibility of printer breaking instructions, and I think the potential's even more with G-code, so this isn't exactly a new problem. But it does really highlight the fact that STL doesn't suffer from this kind of problem, because it doesn't contain any of this kind of information. So anyway, once again, I have to stop to keep the video length down. I think it's already probably quite long, but I think you get a decent idea of what 3MF is now and what it isn't. If you're asking me to call whether you should use 3MF or not, I'm going to say a solid yes on your own designs. But I'm going to say a cautious maybe on designs you download from other people. If you load up a 3MF file and Cura wants you to import profile stuff like you just saw, then chances are it's been saved from a slicer and you probably shouldn't use it. But I think in most cases 3MF files would have been made in a CAD, so they wouldn't contain these settings, and you could just import them like an STL, and you wouldn't get any of those dialogues, and the model would just work like normal. But that certainly does raise some questions, doesn't it? So back to my joke at the beginning, I guess maybe you should just be asking for the STL after all. It was a funny joke though. And on that note, I will both bid you farewell, and thank you for sticking around for 10 days of these videos, if indeed you have. If you haven't, then a link to the playlist should appear in a moment to go watch them. Thank you for watching.